Here we go. We've talked about, we've heard a bit about the kind of the reason we travel, the reason that it almost the best thing we can do for our brains, and health generally actually, is to travel in a certain way. And so, but it seems to me that how we travel, obviously we're going on a clubbing holiday in Magaluf, we're not really doing a great deal for our bodies or minds. But when we talk about, how we travel, what's the thing that, where's your brain going? Where are you headed to?
So for me, travel has always been about curiosity, and Linda and Rajan talked about that idea of scratching the itch, of trying to find something out or wanting to learn about somewhere new. And for me, I like Rajan, grew up in the 70s, and in the 70s we didn't go abroad. There weren't the opportunities, it was very expensive. Also, I was a very bad traveller. I would be car sick going to the village shop. So traveling I wasn't very good at it. And I was also, it turned out, very, very scared of flying. I was very scared of airports, which, given that one grandfather was a test pilot and the other one was in the RAF, obviously it never rubbed off on me. Genetically, I kind of missed out.
You were scared of the airport.
I was scared of the airport, and then I was scared of getting on a flight. But the curiosity that I had about this world that I didn't know, but read about. And I think one of the things that made me travel, and perhaps made me want to travel the way that I do and the way that I love, was travel writing. Was writers like Dervla Murphy, Bruce Chatwin, Christina Dodwell. There are some extraordinary women travelers who traveled in the way that, you encourage people to travel, which is to dive in, to go to a place and not worry about seeing the top 10 sites in a place, but to get there and to immerse in it, to come away feeling like they've had an inkling of that place, more than an inkling. And I think possibly one of the sort of marks of a successful trip is leaving thinking, I need to go back immediately, because I've opened this window, not the mirror, I've opened this window into this new and fascinating place, and now I want to know it better.
I mean, you've been travelling for, I know.
But I
mean, it is actually, she started incredibly young. So when I say you've been kind of in the game for sort of over 3 decades, it's because you're 38.
Obviously.
You're a 7-year-old star.
Yeah.
But
no, and I mean, I did. I went Eurorailing when I finished my O-levels, which obviously we did in those days. Yeah. No one had dreamt up GCSEs, and it was, I worked, I cooked school dinners, and I worked in a shop on Saturdays, and to earn the money to get my Eurorail ticket, which was £100 in those days, and that was my first trip when I was 16. And I didn't, just to prove what a non-traveller I was, I didn't have a proper passport. I had one of those...
Did you have a veterinary passport or something?
No, I had... Is anyone else as old as me? Do you remember those little passports that you had from the post office? So you couldn't go.
Was that when we had a staple on your face and a kind of...
Yeah, but it was it was brown, I think. It was like a little brown book, and you couldn't go. So I hoped to go to Greece, but I couldn't go across Eastern Europe, as it was then, with my little brown passport. So I was sort of restricted to Western Europe, which was fine because, you know, I'd been basically restricted to about 2 miles from home because of being travel sick. So, you know, everything was, Kent was a surprise.
Kent is a surprise.
But it was, you know, that was my first experience of travel. And because I was doing it absolutely on a shoestring and going by train, you know, I kind of had no choice but to immerse in the places that I went. And there was no, you know, there was no chance of fancy hotels. You know, I slept on benches mainly. My poor mother. I thought she brought me up and I became a tramp at 16. But yeah, I think that set the scene for me of you know, the sheer excitement and privilege, let's say, of going to somewhere new, and the you know, the dopamine rush, all the things that Linda spoke about that happened.
Does that still happen? Right?
Yes.
So it's your job. I mean,
Yes.
you do it all the time. You've just been. She's been on submarines and ships with the Navy. I mean, you know, I'm in the Isle of Wight on a grey ship going somewhere. I can't tell you where I am. I'm on a submarine. You know, it's totally random. You just never know where she's going to be from day to day. Do you still get that dopamine hit? Is it not? Are you not an addict, kind of at the tail end of an addiction?
No, and I kind of, you know, there are things that I don't like about travel. I still hate airports. If somebody invented the proper Harry Potter way of getting around, if you could be, you know, whatever it, what's it called? Is there a young person in the room? You know,
young person who watched Star Trek. Yeah.
But you know, if you could be teleported or whatever it is from one place to the other, that would be wonderful. If I never had to get on a plane again, it would be wonderful. But once you've got that bit over, the getting to a new place, it's everything. I think all your senses just become so alert and so alive. It's the, you know, it's the new smells, it's the feeling of the air, it's the sound of a new language, it's the colour, you know, everything is new and different. And what I've discovered now, I think I had this idea that travel had to always be to somewhere new. You know, you always had to, you know, it had to be, it couldn't go back to a place because that was sort of unimaginative and a little...
Well, that flew by, didn't it?
Is that us done?
That's it.
Should we go for gin?
Yes.
But it was somehow, it felt like cheating to go back to the same place. You know, it's a little bit unimaginative. The difference, I think, with what I've realized with all these, thank you, decades of travel, is actually going back to places has its own reward as well.
Right. So, okay. So I think there's sort of two camps here, right? So there's people who love to keep going back to similar places or same places, and those who are constantly going new. Hands up if you're one of the newbie, you seek the new. That's your sort of default setting. And how many sort of tend to like to kind of really learn about a place? Who goes back to places? Okay, so you've kind of...
Yeah.
Depends.
I mean, the thing about...
I love going back. I was always a terrible traveller. I mean, I was going backpacking across Central America. From North America, I made it about 50 kilometers south of the border from Tijuana. And I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. I want to live here, and I'll live in that cabin, and I'll set up a little cafe, and But I just wanted to be somewhere, to kind of really dig into it and learn the language, and I love the fact that there's always discovery, even when, you know, which our whole business is built around sort of inch wide, mile deep, but there's always discovery. I think it's just whether you're going vertically or laterally.
And I think one of the things that we've talked about, and I know the conversation that has in the room has been about, the things that make a trip memorable. And that word "or" is wonderful. And there will always be, if you're lucky, if you choose the right tour operator, obviously, there will always be, that'll be a £5. There will always
I'm not doubling your fee on the spot like that.
Oh, come
Honestly,
on. But there will always be those, those moments of awe, those, when you see a landscape for the first time, when you go into a rainforest for the first time, there will be those moments of awe. But actually, some of the most rewarding, some of the most memorable things that I suspect all of us take away from a trip are those encounters with people. And one of the things that I have loved about returning to places is seeing those people again. Maybe meeting other people from there.
I don't have to sweat the Eiffel Tower.
Exactly, and that actually, your experience goes from a kind of, I don't know whether you can differentiate it this way, but from a trip to a visit, to an experience of going back to something that's familiar. But when it's familiar, in a funny sort of way, you become, I think, more open to the sort of the things that would never be in a guidebook, because they're not necessarily spectacular, but there's something that because you're almost becoming more local, you start to learn about and feel, so.
It sort of demystifies it. So I think we're less, there is the part of the sort of the exploitation, the exploration brain, and the exploitation sort of looks after us.
Yeah.
And it's the circularity of thought, it's the insularity of thought, and so it's like this is new and weird, and it smells different, or it looks different, or it feels different. And so if you remove that, then your sort of natural impetus is coming from the explorer part of your brain. So you're you're throwing yourself more freely into experiences if you're not worrying about the kind of the details, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's that thing of, we were talking about
not that one.
Whether length matters.
It's Panto season. Does length matter?
Does length matter? But so the length. Oh, the length of a trip.
Finish the sentence.
The length of a trip.
God.
Does it matter?
Worse.
No, it's just your brain. But
at the tittering on row 3, I know who you are. Yeah.
But it is. If you have the luxury of time, of being able to go to a place, because that sort of, there is the initial adjustment of being in a new place. There is the excitement, the kind of the dopamine, the heightened awareness that everything is new. And sometimes that can make you, you can almost not notice things because you're noticing everything. Do you know what I mean? Right. So you can miss the smaller details, which are the things then that you remember. So it's a little bit like, you don't strike me as an audience of people who are obsessed with selfies and which is why you're all so lovely.
Quite a lot of them came and photobombed you in the internet. That's a little bit, you know who you are.
But one of the things that I find so disappointing now about the way that some people travel is that it appears to be to try and demonstrate to people they know and even people that they don't, that they have been somewhere. And instead of just being there, I mean, I was telling you this, I had the most sort of extraordinarily, I mean, if it wasn't so awful, it was funny and awful. I was in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, and I was there partly to do an article and partly on holiday. There's an amazing man who is trying to set up a long-distance walking trail through Sri Lanka as a way of connecting people to communities that get overlooked by the kind of the popular places. And Sri Lanka has a very distinct kind of top 10. And one of those top 10 is Lion Rock. If any of you have been to Sri Lanka, you have probably been to Lion Rock, and you would kind of be mad to miss it. It is astonishing. And if you haven't been, you know, it is this socking great lump of rock in the jungle, and you know, a madly kind of probably psychotic, clearly very nervous king built his palace on top of it so that no one could get at him. Right. So it's, you know, it is amazing. And to climb up it nowadays, you know, they've made it a little bit easier than it was in the 10th century, but it's still a metal ladder and it's very steep. And if you want to sort of see it without about 10 million people, you literally set off in the dark at 4:30 in the morning, and, you know, you try and get there so that you get a sense of this remarkable place. And when the sun comes up, you know, it comes up above the trees and there's all the mist and it's incredible. I, being mad, obviously got up there, you know, long before it was light, raced up there and had a remarkable 20 minutes on the top where there was nobody. I couldn't see anything because it was pitch dark, but it kind of didn't matter.
So there may have been loads of people up there, you just couldn't see them.
But then, I was just astonished by the people who then came up, you know, 10 minutes before sunrise, in outfits. They were in you know, like flowing kaftans and heels and full makeup. I mean, what time these people got up in the morning, because it was still like 5:45 in the morning. You know, no one looks their best at 5:45, but and they then spent, you know, an unreasonable amount of time organizing the shot, not to see the sunrise and the mist coming up and you know, the call of the birds as the sun came up and this sort of remarkable light on the rock and everything else. No, it was and you just think, why are you here? What are you going to take away from this? And worse, the people who see that photograph, what do they then get from that? And are people now traveling because they're looking at somebody's Instagram feed and going, I want to take that photograph? Yeah. Not, I want to go to that place, I want to see that view.
We passed an orderly queue of people, completely randomly. They were sort of Parliament Square, there's a red phone box there, and they've just organised themselves into a line about as long as the nave here. And one by one they're going up, and they get up to the front and they pop a sexy pose, and there's a phone box and Big Ben behind them.
Yeah.
It was like,
and it's
your experience of Parliament Square was actually standing in line.
Yeah.
But you didn't experience the place. You just sort of stood in a queue to do the same thing as all these other people. So there is no actual thing happening. There is no memory being created.
But it's also this idea that travel becomes a formula. You know, it's like a formulaic. It's not even. I mean, we all know you set an itinerary for people when they travel. You know, with you there is an itinerary. Of course, there's an itinerary. But a good itinerary, in my view, is one that guides doesn't lead, if you know what I mean. So gives you pointers, but gives you space, gives you the ability to get to somewhere, but then, you know, what you want to do and what you're interested in, there's space to do that.
So in our more pompous moments, we liken this comparison as between a sort of a builder and an architect, and there are some architects in the room, I know. But you know, the walls themselves, the building, the construction is the stuff. It's well, there's a hotel and there's a guided tour and there's a this and a that. In a sense, and particularly nowadays, kind of any monkey can do that. It's actually the distance, the space between the walls that matters. It's setting the conditions for this experience. Yeah. I took this photo 3-4 weeks ago. And like you say, I want to go back there now. I mean, these women were just fabulous. I just loved it. It was so special.
Yeah.
But it's not, booking that hotel is not the thing. It's actually just being in the right place at the right time of year when it's not that busy. And it's the negative space. It's actually the gaps we leave between the walls that matters much more, often much more than the walls themselves. And
you know, what I've seen, even when I was in Costa Rica at the beginning of the year, and again, I was there sort of partly for pleasure, and I was writing. And one of the things that I was asked to write for Wanderlust was, it was the 50th year of Corcovado National Park. Corcovado in the south of Costa Rica, and it's less visited than some of the, you know, the more popular or more accessible ones. It's still very visited. And we got there, we had an amazing guide who picked up on the fact that I was mildly obsessed with ecosystems. Sorry, but it's just a nerdy thing, but I love an ecosystem. So we were talking ecosystems, and what's so astonishing about Corcovado, which I hadn't sort of clocked when they said, oh, it's 50 years old, we thought, well, that's its national park status. No, it is 50 years old. He took it, when we got off the boat, because you could only get there really by boat, when we got off the boat, he took us to this sort of scrubby little bit. Everyone went off and disappeared, to have there, literally, it was like an Instagram tour, you know, with guides saying, this is the tree where you stand, we'll take the photograph because it's a big strangler fig, so this is where you'll want your photograph. I mean, it was literally, it was a formula. And luckily, our guide didn't do formulas. What he did was take us to this broken bit of concrete, and you're slightly thinking, hang on a minute, you know, quite like to see a tapir. But he then said, this was a school. Yeah. You know, 52 years ago, there was a school here. These were farms. There were no trees. And then he made that experience of Corcovado just unforgettable because I'm standing there going, nature did this. It was given a chance. Yeah. And in 50 years, I'm standing in a place where there are squirrel monkeys here because it's secondary forest, and and there's an anteater in a tree up there. But 50 years ago, there were cattle here, and there was a monoculture of grass, and it was astonishing. And I will never forget that moment because of that guide, and because he didn't go for the.
To get you to go to Costa Rica, like, way too.
I did, and he's right.
No, they have beds and everything there. I'm not going there.
Going to Costa Rica, I did not want to go to Costa Rica.
Too much, and so I mean, actually, one of the ways I convinced you was around the people.
Yeah.
And we sort of keep coming back to this, but the connections with people. And it always does seem that these memories and these strongest stories always seem to revolve around a person. Rajan's story about the New York cabbie, despite all the kind of theoretically way more glamorous experiences actually the go-to?
Yeah.
It's a bloke in a taxi with good speakers and a rocking taste in music. You two, I mean, you were describing it seemed to be your go-to memory of all your travels. That was.
Well, yeah. So that's really mean of you because it'll probably make me cry again. I made you cry. So I was telling Tom about an encounter I had. I was filming a documentary in the Middle East, and it was a long time ago, and it was a documentary called The Frankincense Trail. And I had the great joy of many years ago being in Jordan and staying with a friend of a friend who was a New Zealand woman called Marguerite. And she had been traveling in Jordan in the 70s and had fallen in love with a Bedouin from Petra. And not only did she fall in love with him, but she married him and she lived in a cave because the Bedouin was still living in caves in Petra at that time. And against all odds, and probably everyone kind of going, well, that'll never last. It absolutely lasted. They had 3 children, and when the Bedouin were moved out of Petra to a kind of prefab village on the edge of the ancient city, they moved there, and I went to stay with them there. And Mohammed, her husband, who was just the most wonderful man, he still had a camel tied up outside. He was Bedou through and through. And I was about to do a journey. I had an obsession, I still have an obsession with old trade routes. I just love how the world was connected by these ancient routes. And I was about to go to Mali. I wanted to cross the Sahara, but with salt traders. Anyway, it's a whole other story, and we'd be here for years if I told it. But
the doors are locked. We got the place till 10.
But Mohammed said to me, he said, the salt trail, he said, that's for wimps. He said, what you should be doing is the frankincense trail. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, it was the route that frankincense was carried from the land of Punt to the Sea of Galilee. And I said, where is the land of Punt? Where was it? And he said, well, we believe it's probably in modern-day Oman now. And he said, the route went through Oman and through Yemen and through Saudi Arabia and through Jordan. It was the Nabateans were part of this route and ended up in Palestine. And I said, well, I'd never be allowed. I mean, I can't do that. And as I say, this was 2009, 2010, maybe sometime. I said, I can't do it. I said, first of all, there's no way I can get into Saudi Arabia. And secondly, I'm a non-Muslim woman. It wouldn't happen. He said, we'll dress you up as a Bedou. We'll do it. We'll do it. And then very sadly, he died. And I was asked by the then head of BBC Two, who was a wonderful man called Roly Keating. I was asked one day, was there a journey that I wanted to do? And I said, well, there is, but, it would be impossible.
The insurance is going to be heavy.
I said it would be impossible, but I kind of want to do it because in kind of honor of this wonderful man, Mohammed. And he said, I think you should do it. And it took 2 years. It took 2 years to get the permissions, particularly to go to Saudi Arabia. And Yemen then was gloriously, kind of functionally dysfunctional. Again, the people there were astonishing. Every part of that journey was astonishing. But there was a moment in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has changed phenomenally in the last 2 years. But then it was still, it was a very difficult place to be. I had to shop. I was taken by my kind of fixer in Yemen to go and buy an abaya and buy the appropriate outfit for Saudi Arabia. And I remember I had the full, burqa on, and I remember standing in front of a mirror wearing all of this stuff and feeling like I'd been disappeared. I was just this black shape. It was very, very, very odd. It was like and she said, I said, what? Why? She said, I don't mind wearing it because, and she was beautiful, this girl, and she was always beautifully made up, something I never am. And she said, but when I'm covered up, I can go, I'm kind of anonymous. No one looks at me. And I said, but if you didn't wear makeup, if you didn't, wouldn't, for her it was like a power. She said, it's almost powerful. I know that underneath all this, I look like this. So it was almost a powerful thing. It was a really interesting perspective. But for me, I just felt like, I'd been disappeared. Anyway, went into Saudi Arabia. It was a fascinating country to be in. And we had this experience in Jeddah. We went to meet a man who was known as Engineer Sammy. And and I know he's still alive because my husband was working in Saudi Arabia about 2 years ago, and I said, if you go to Jeddah, you have to find Engineer Sammy. And Engineer Sammy is sort of the self-proclaimed protector of Jeddah. He's an architect, he loves art, he's an incredible kind of Renaissance man, really. And he has been instrumental in the restoration of old Jeddah, particularly. And my husband was filming a documentary there, and very sweetly, Engineer Sammy said, well, if you're married to Kate, I'll help you.
So you weren't totally invisible.
So I wasn't totally invisible. But the moment that he sums up for me what is truly special about good travel. He said when I met him, I need to take you to this place. And he's quite small and bustly in all his white robes. And I remember, he probably didn't because it would have been hugely inappropriate, but I sort of remember him taking my hand. But I think it was a sort of, it was a metaphorical taking of hand. And he said, we must go to this building. So we rushed into this building, and he said, this is the merchant's house. He said, it is one of the oldest buildings in Jeddah, and it is the tallest building in Jeddah, and it had 7 stories. And he said, a merchant's family would have lived on every story, but we mustn't delay. We must get to the top. So we rushed to the top of this house, and we've got the camera crew kind of sweating away behind us with the thing. And we get to the top, and we get to the roof, and, often, when you're in places, there's actually a thing about you leave rebar sticking out of roofs because then that allows you to build another story if you ever want to. So we get up onto the roof, and it's all rebar, and it's not beautiful, but there is Jeddah in front of us. But he's not really concerned about that either. He said, I have brought you here because Jeddah has 26 mosques. And he said the imams are very competitive. So they don't record the call to prayer. They all of them sing it. And he said, the sun is about to go down, so we're going to get the evening call to prayer, and you had to be here to see this. You had to be here. And so we're standing there, and Jeddah, the old Jeddah is these winding cobbled streets, and there are all these the shops aren't shops that you go into, they're sort of outward onto the street, so they're effectively like kind of market stalls, really. And all I could hear from up there was the clatter of these shutters shutting, and then people like little beetles running through the streets towards the mosque, and then the sun is getting lower and lower in the sky, and I'm standing next to this man who is so unbelievably poetic about his city, and he loves it. And then he's like, and the first call to prayer, Allah. And then it's like this, it's a bad analogy, but a Mexican wave of sound goes across the city. This beautiful moment, this beautiful moment.
You did it again.
I did it.
I'm going to tell on you here. Oh, here, look.
Thanks.
There you go. You were approached on a plane some years later by a guy who'd worked in conflict resolution for decades, as he said to you. And he said that clip had done more to educate the people he worked with in conflict resolution. So this is sort of cross-cultural conflict resolution. Of course, all the nonsense we hear about Islam and the kind of... But that moment of you on camera just being utterly moved by otherness, by beauty, or all these things in kind of an unexpected, not beautiful in a sense, not a beautiful place, but this incredibly beautiful thing, that you were moved by it. He said, that did more in my line of work, in conflict resolution, than any other thing I've ever come across in my career. And so, I applaud you for that, for one thing, because that is not simple to do, but that's sort of genuine.
But it wasn't me. That was the beauty.
It's you being open. It is you travelling with curiosity. So I'm going to talk over it. It is you travelling with curiosity and with an open heart and an open mind, always, despite it being a job. It is, and that is something, as much as any of us travel.
But it would never... It could never have happened without the generosity of that person.
And the hero of place.
And that is, we should never, ever, ever underestimate those moments. The moment of the lady with the dog, allowing you to take her photograph. I got a lovely photograph of, an old couple who were just standing in their door in El Salvador. And it was just their shop, and there was just something about them and the colours and everything else. And I said, would you mind if I take your photograph? And it was just on my phone. I'm a really bad photographer, but they were so kind of thrilled to be asked. And it was just a lovely moment. And it's those moments that make travel count, I think. And make, I suspect every single one of us in this room are very conscious about the environment, the environmental impact of travel. Perhaps we all have that conflicted struggle of should we be getting on planes?
Yeah.
And it's something I ask myself, and it's something I am asked a lot. I bang on about the environment and have been doing for 30 years. You do too. I know it's something that, as I say, I suspect we're all very conscious of. So, how do we justify travel? We do it well. We do it as well as we possibly can.
What is well?
Well,
last thought. What is travelling well before we have a Q&A? Does anyone have a question for Kate, by the way, and Rajan? And Linda, I just need to know if there's any questions. Okay, fine.
So I think well is making sure that it's not all take. That when you go to a place, you can give. And it's not just money, although obviously that is important. In a lot of places and in a lot of communities, tourism is immensely important financially. But it should always be about a cultural exchange or a means of learning from each other. I think if we all come away from a travel experience feeling that we have a better understanding or a new knowledge, we've learned something new, we've eaten something different, we've heard a piece of music that will forever remind us of that funny little bar, or we've walked through a market and we've seen what people are buying for their lunch that day. It's those things, it is travel. Without travel, it's difficult to have tolerance. It's difficult to have understanding and empathy and celebration of otherness. That's why we need to travel, but that's why we need to travel well.
I mean, yeah. Laughably, there was a sort of script sitting down here, but honestly, you could leave us here for hours and we'll chat. When we get thrown a journalist who's going to go off and do a piece, you never quite know what you're going to get. And the sort of typically the bigger the name, the bigger the pain in the bum. And I have to say, I am constantly and have been constantly impressed by just how uncynical you remain. What a great sort of voice for the human side of travel, the people of travel. You know that's the case in the relationships you've built with our partners on the ground across Costa Rica in this case, but you get it. There is the kind of no cynicism, and you still manage to maintain curiosity and gratitude. There seem to me really fundamental pieces of how to travel well. So I'm not inviting a response, I'm congratulating you.
Thank you.
And I'm thanking you.
It's very, well...
So, I would like now to invite, come on Linda, come on Rajan, come up here. If anyone's got questions, Rajan and Linda are going to share it. Thank you, Greta. Greta's going to be roving with a microphone. Please wait until the microphone appears before you answer. And we'll just do a few questions, if you like, questions and answers. Remember to address it to who you want to answer. Where are we? Over there. There's one over there. Lady in white.
Hi there, thank you very much. It's been really interesting. It's just a question. I mean, I suspect everyone in this room is quite lucky and we've travelled a lot. I'm wondering about how, given that our own country is actually in some sort of degree of crisis, and we go off and find other people very interesting, but perhaps on our own front door there's some people who are actually just as interesting and need us more than... And this whole thing is maybe coinciding with maybe we shouldn't be getting on planes at great vast expense and like lucky for us, but actually, you know, look at those three ladies behind in the photograph that you were mentioning, Tom. Oh, they're so interesting, so amazing. It's like, yeah, they're probably here too. Do we need to do something that we look more and give more back to our own place? It's rhetorical, perhaps.
I was struggling to hear a little bit on the audio there. Was the question around kind of distance? Do we need to actually travel far in order to experience?
Yeah, sorry. Oh, blimey. Okay, I'll go again.
So should we perhaps remember that we've got magnificent things on our own doorsteps? Do we need to travel to actually still have very special experiences that might be entirely possible close to home?
Yeah, 100%. I just think, you know, we're all very lucky. We have all travelled by the sound of it, everyone in this room. And it's great to go and meet all these interesting people all over the world. But right now, our own country just feels really in discord, and there's a lot of problems. We're not looking at each other with respect and caring and kindness. Take me overseas and I'm looking at locals. Oh, I'm so lovely to them. Am I that nice to my locals here? And perhaps we need to, because of the whole issue of travel, and maybe we're wasting resources traveling away, maybe all of us lucky people who have traveled, I'm just curious as to your view, is it time to bring that back here and be a little bit more considerate locally? That's all. I don't know. It's rhetorical.
Well, it put you two out of the job.
Yeah, but
it is a very valid.
It's a valid thing. So what happens? I mean, yeah, and I think there is a real problem with this idea of distance equals a superior travel experience. So often we'll get this. We do Spain and Portugal, and then Latin America. Often we'll get a call from somebody who says, "We want to go amazing holiday. We want to go honeymoon, September, and we want to go somewhere absolutely miles away. We've got 9 days." We'll go to Spain. It's absolutely stunning in September. There's some incredible places to stay. Why are you spending a third of the time in travel when you could be... Very rarely washes because of a sort of false idea of, well, no, because the further away you go, the posher. The longer the flight, the posher the experience is, the better experience. Neurologically, there is a point at which it's likely to be a bit more other. Ironically, and honeymooners, I think, are probably more prone to this than anyone else, but travelling with a mirror, you know, all right, I want a spa, and I want this, and I want that, and actually they're going far and far away to somewhere that's really different, but in a way that's been curated to make it look really the same as a place down the road. So I think you're right, there is a problem with that. However, and I will really, really make a strong point for this, the protection that is afforded through tourism done well, which is to say, tourism which is predicated on a fair exchange. There's financial, there's cultural, there's all sorts. That underpins vast swathes of not just the world's kind of communities, but the nature that surrounds those communities. I do not believe that Antarctica would be what it is today. I don't believe it would be protected without tourism. The Galapagos would not be protected without it. The Amazon would be deforesting even faster if it wasn't for. Corcovado National Park would still be grazing land. It wouldn't be a park. So there are complex trade-offs, but the sort of let's go into caves, I personally don't fall on that side of the argument. Roger?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say, it brings up a really good quote that I heard once by this guy, this Hungarian philosopher, who said, we travel thousands of miles to look in fascination at people who are just like the people who live around the corner from us. And one thing that travel can do is actually remind you that people at home are fascinating too. So it opens your mind up, not just being abroad, but actually closer to home. So there's a very valid point you're making, but I think travel allows you, it gives you that awareness.
Anything to add?
No, I think it's really well said. I think one thing that we find too is that the way people travel abroad, then when they come home, they apply some of that. So not only in the, hey, well, what about the people that live nearby me who I maybe wouldn't have interacted with, but also stuff like going to the local market. Why do we get the Waitrose order in? I've never done that. What? You know, it just makes you curious about all of the sort of smaller independently owned places that are near us. I mean, at least this is something that's been very big for me. Some of the discoveries, I say discoveries as if I were the first, which I wasn't, but that I made on travels. I come back and I'm like, what else around here? And the kind of conversations that you have as well with people about that.
Yeah.
So, hope that answers.
Question, Lady Greta, you're going to get your steps in. Challenge Annika.
Oh, okay. This is a question for Kate. You mentioned meeting Marguerite. And a couple of years ago, we had the fortune to be in Petra, and it was so beautiful. I mean, it was the most magical moment to walk into that place. It saddened me a little bit that her family...
Just put the microphone a little bit closer.
Okay, it saddened me a little bit that the family had been moved. Well, actually, all of the Bedouins had been moved out of the valley into the high ground, and they were given running water, electricity, and then they would come into the valley every day to sell their wares. How do you kind of sit with that? I felt I had the most beautiful experience there, but I felt saddened for them that they had to, I mean, she'd lived years and years in that cave, and they all had, and they had to, well, they didn't have to give it up, but I just wonder where you sit with that when you travel so much and see those sort of compromises.
Just to, for anyone who didn't quite catch the question, this lady also met Marguerite in Jordan and in Petra, and was just asking how I feel about Marguerite and all the Bedouin families being moved out of Petra. And as you say, kind of being given the trappings that you would think would be a nice thing, so being given electricity and running water and everything else, but being forced away from their ancestral base and home.
I've got an answer.
You always have an answer. Go on, you give an answer.
You've got 2 mics.
I have. Sorry.
It's important for us to
Greedy.
be heard.
Yeah.
Don't go to
Go on.
karaoke with Kate Humble. Just say
Shall I start and then you can butt in and tell me I'm wrong?
Don't. I paid for the sausage, all right?
I have been lucky enough to work with and film with a number of nomadic groups. And seen how governments and settled communities have reacted to them. And governments particularly find nomadic groups very difficult because they think of them as being uncontrollable. And so they will often offer apparently lovely things, you know, money to settle, or, as you say, electricity, or here's a nice house with a flushing loo, without actually considering or talking to the communities to ask what they want. So inherently, I think it is despicable that people are removed from their homes without that choice. And I don't think they were given a proper choice. And therein lies a big conundrum for us as tourists, because the Jordanian government's reason for moving people out of Petra was to sort of make it better for tourists.
Yeah. And it is, and that is the ugly truth of it. It's like, well, that's unsightly. There's washing out on the lines when we want bus park to be there or whatever. We were talking, so yeah, that example, clear example of it being done extremely badly. Not to be totally Pollyannish, but there are examples of it being done well and where tourism can generate sort of a greater balance. And we were talking earlier about the Bribri community in Costa Rica, Yorquín. I know various of us in the room were there fairly recently. A lot of us with our our radars up saying this is going to be, you know, if this is performative sort of ethno-tourism, we're out. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it.
But the difference with the Bribri, so have you heard about this community in Costa Rica? So they're one of the very, very few, there's like 2% of indigenous people left in Costa Rica. And the Bribri are one of those tribes, indigenous groups. And there is now the chance, so they were very, very, very cut off. No roads to their communities. You could get there by river, but you couldn't get there by river. I couldn't get there by river. You have to pole upstream against this wild current. It's bonkers. But the Bribri now have invited tourism and have done for the last 20 years. But it was initiated by themselves, actually by the women, slightly unsurprisingly, sorry, folks, but the community was basically on its knees because they lived by agriculture, by selling principally cacao and bananas, and there was a disease like ash dieback in the cacao, which meant that basically there was no income coming into the community, and the men were going to have to leave the community to go and find work elsewhere. So the women spotted that basically the community was going to disintegrate. They were going to lose their great cultural identity, which they had fought so hard to preserve. So their answer to it was, why don't we try and generate an income from tourism? So the difference with that is that they weren't being forcibly moved out. They were inviting us in, but very much on their terms, and done in a way that is super sensitive by the very nature of their dictating what you see and what you don't see and what you do and what you don't see. But it is the most anyone who's been perhaps to the Brie can back me up on this. It is the most wonderful experience.
But it's a balanced economy, so they haven't gone all in on tourism. So I think that helps. The other thing, I would say, somewhat in defence of outsiders coming in, is that it was actually a Swedish NGO that went in to fix the cacao fungi that said, okay, well, while we're looking at the disease here, this is kind of incredible what you've got going on here. We can connect you with people, UNESCO and all this, to do something with this sort of vibrant culture that you have.
Because how would they know?
Exactly, they had not a sufficient sort of external perspective to say, this is precious, this is actually, forget the agricultural piece, culturally this is worth protecting. Then for them to be given to understand that, and then given the means to then exploit that to a limit that allows a balanced economy, so that if tourism disappeared tomorrow, COVID happens, they're not down in their uppers and they're not switching their society. They are not becoming a mirror. They're not turning into an ethnic village near the Panamanian border. It's Yorkim. And the kids go to school and they play and they do this. And that's the line and enough, the concept of enough exists there. And I think that's really important.
But what happened in Petra was effectively a cleaning up campaign to make it, more, in the Jordanian government's kind of insane mind, to make it more kind of tourist friendly. And actually what they did was remove the authenticity that we've all been talking about here, the thing that, good travel seeks is that, the authenticity, the fact that Petra was a living city. It was this incredible ancient city that we'd all seen on Indiana Jones, and it was actually real. But, what made it special was that it was still lived in. It was vibrant. And now it's still, it is a remarkable place, but it's had its personality removed so that it's just become a series of Instagram shots.
Which I think what we seek, hopefully the curious traveller, the open traveller, is seeking somewhere that is precisely not changed by our visit, our presence. It's a very difficult balance to get, but it's definitely that. I don't want to think that you've swept the floor for me if you don't sweep floors. So, I just want it to be as is. It's the window versus the mirror thing again. We are running short on time, so I think we should do one last question and then hit the pub. Sorry, are these hands up for the pub or for... So hard to tell.
Firstly, thank you. It's been really fascinating the whole evening. Thank you. Two parts to my question. One is that a lot of the environmental impact that I think we all consider ourselves to be responsible for is the flights. Yeah. So how do you, going forward, how can you influence airlines who are already looking at using non-fossil fuel aviation? Have you got any power to push a little harder from your side? And the second part is that I'm a customs and excise officer, and I'd like to have a few words with you after the evening.
Curses. Foiled again. Tony, is that you clapping me getting chucked in the clink, mate? Aviation. Do you want to do that? I mean, we can talk aviation.
Yeah, I mean, I've covered this journalistically as well. It's a trade-off, I guess. I mean, look, even the most ardent environmentalists will use planes to get. I mean, look at the Bellum, what's happening right now. All these people have gone thousands of miles by plane to talk about climate change and what's happening. So there is a hypocrisy there. There has been a movement, and there is currently a movement, for example, in Europe, to use trains more than planes. I mean, it's there. There's an awful lot of talk about sustainable aviation fuel. Very hard to achieve, but it is possible. Listen, I mean, I would sound like a hypocrite if I said that, don't take a plane, because it hasn't, without that, I wouldn't have experienced what I've experienced. I can't answer that question. I mean, are you saying, I'd be interested in your view, should we travel by plane?
We can take that to the pub.
We can take that to the pub, okay.
Genuinely, this is one without.
Yeah.
In terms of what practically can be done, I think we should think very carefully before getting on a plane. I think the problem of aviation is casual, thoughtless use of aviation. So the kind of, I went on a shopping weekend to New York, I think that should be sort of an approximately the same thing. I got absolutely plastered last night and drove home. I just think it's not acceptable anymore. Have a thought. So typically going for longer, is better. It is a very difficult one internationally. Of course, airlines have got away with it for years. I personally think that frequent flyer schemes should be absolutely scrapped and they should be replaced by a frequent flyer levy. I think it's actually relatively very simple to implement. You get a certain amount free a year, and once you go beyond that, you go on a sort of a scale, an upward scale. That is all very simple. The issue is that having the application of that evenly across jurisdictions is nearly impossible. Europe are getting closest to it anywhere in the world, and hopefully that will shift stuff. But there's an awful lot of collaboration that goes on within the industry under the B Corp umbrella. We work with other B Corp tour operators, so we get together to push that there's actually a collective voice that says, you know what, the science-based target initiative, it's just impossible for us to reach because you've basically let the airlines off the hook for their emissions, but the tour operators are on the hook for the emissions, which include the airline emissions. So how does this work? So there is a huge amount of complexity.
And also, can I just add a pragmatic thing? If train travel were cheaper,
well, it all comes back
it all comes back, but
tax-free aviation
it
fuel
costs
shouldn't be
me
tax-free.
more to get from Wales to here today than I could fly to Greece.
Yeah.
And that is the insane thing. So if we don't have a travel industry that allows us to makes it more viable and attractive to travel greener, unfortunately, we're not going to. And on that note, we should definitely go to the pub.
We'll go to the pub. Right. So, thank you very much indeed to Rajan Datta, Kate Humble, to Linda Biggers. In conclusion, it's not where we go, it's how we go. We kind of know it. It's good for your brain, it makes you live longer, and it keeps us in business. So it's all good, win-win, more sausage all round.